The story starts with a boy being ostracized, mocked, and tormented. He was abandoned, labeled as a cursed being due to his broken lower dantian and unique eyes. Taunted and humiliated, he grew resentful but refused to succumb to despair. When pushed to his limits, he fights back, refusing to be a victim any longer. His vengeful fury ignites a battle, but despite his defiance, he remains hunted, fleeing both enemies and the ghosts that haunt him. This is Yan Wunhui, the protagonist of this story. He was born with a special ability to see ghosts. Just when he seems alone in his struggle, a mysterious martial artist appears. Unlike others, this warrior does not see his eyes as a curse but as a blessing, one belonging to a rare and gifted individual. Encouraging him to embrace his potential rather than reject it, the stranger hints at a greater destiny awaiting him. Though initially doubtful, the boy found warmth not in the man's words, but in the touch of his outstretched hand. Taken in by this savior, the boy dedicated himself to his master, his only reason for living. Back in the present day, the night looms over the heavenly demon palace, its silhouette imposing against the sky, veiled in a dense, eerie mist. Within the grand halls, a tense conversation unfolds. Yeon Woon-hoi has risen to the position of the junior lord of the heavenly demon sect. Armed with piercing red eyes and long silver hair, adorned in elegant yet authoritative robes, his gaze is calm but burdened. His master is suffering from key deviation rampage and he blames himself. His inadequacy as a disciple. His inability to overcome his own limitations for his master's condition. The air shifts. A new presence enters, a man of power, his aura heavy with authority. Cheon Hajin, the martial lance, strides forward, his sharp gaze evaluating the young lord. A polite exchange, but tension lingers beneath the surface. Hajin comments on the struggles the junior lord faces, hinting at the weight of responsibility he has yet to fully bear. The young lord acknowledges this with a nod, offering carefully measured words, yet something flickers in his eyes. Mistrust. Alone, his thoughts spiral. He cannot ignore the feeling that Cheon Hajin's return is not mere coincidence. His fingers tighten around a cup of liquor, the sharp scent cutting through his wariness. A bitter chuckle escapes him. Poison. A subtle yet unmistakable taste lingers on his tongue. His eyes darken, so it has begun. Lifting the cup with an unreadable expression, he issues a chilling invitation to those present. Will you all also have a drink? A dare, a provocation. The weight of his words settles in the room like an iron shroud. Then, chaos. Dark figures descend from the rafters, their blades gleaming under the flickering candlelight. A coordinated assassination attempt, swift and merciless. But the junior lord does not flinch. A cold smile spreads across his lips as he rises. How dare you fight me in my own halls? The battle begins. A shimmer in the air betrayed the illusion that had deceived them. From the far side of the chamber, a figure emerged from the shadows. His silver hair cascaded down his shoulders, a stark contrast to the dark violet aura that pulsed around him. His single eye gleamed with quiet amusement, as though he had expected this attack all along. Before the assassins could react, the air around them shifted. A massive, spectral chain materialized in an instant, its jagged edges gleaming under the dim light. With a single, fluid motion, the chain tore through the air, slamming into its targets with unrelenting force. The attackers barely had time to register what had happened before their bodies were sent flying, crashing into the walls with sickening thuds. A few managed to steady themselves, but the damage had already been done. His strength was beyond their expectations. In the distance, a group of elders watched in grim silence. They had hoped the poison would weaken him, had expected him to collapse before he could put up a fight. But there he stood, unwavering. Yeon Woon-hoi took a slow step forward, his violet energy coiling around him like a living force. He was unfazed, as though the attempt on his life had been nothing more than an inconvenience. This was no ordinary opponent, and now the ones who had conspired against him realized their mistake. They had underestimated him, and there would be no second chances. He was able to easily overpower any of the grunts even in his poisoned state. The battle raged on as Cheon Hajin, with overwhelming energy, unleashed his fury upon the junior lord. The force of his attack sent Woon-hoi flying through the air, crashing through the ornate walls of the grand hall. As the dust settled, Woon-hoi, now bloodied and gasping, still refused to surrender. He staggered to his feet, laughing despite his wounds. His defiance only earned him further disdain. Surrounded by wary onlookers, he realized his fate was sealed. However, unwavering and merciless, he stepped forward, drawing a weapon, a blade of ominous power. "The demon dragon sword!" Cheon Hajin gasped, his voice laced with fear. Woonhoi said nothing, merely raising the blade. The air grew heavy with the weight of impending death. The battle was over. It was no longer a contest of strength. It was an execution. With an ominous glow, he gathers an immense amount of mystic power, channeled into his demonic blade, one forged from the remains of the first heavenly demon. His face, bloodied but determined, reveals his intent. He has imbued all his remaining energy into this final destructive act. The opposing elders scramble to form a barrier, but their efforts are in vain. He utters the words, "Hellfire Soul Explosion Ritual." A surge of dark energy erupts, engulfing the battlefield in an overwhelming purple light. A desperate scream pierces through the chaos, "Yan Woonhoi!" But the devastation has already begun, sending shockwaves across the land, shaking even distant mountains. The next scene opens in a snowy landscape. The cold wind howling as a battered Woonhoi kneels on the ground. He reflects on the cruel irony of his impending death in the freezing snow, reminiscent of a painful past, but fate was cruel. His own fragile body led to his master suffering from a key rampage deviation. Racked with guilt, he could not allow himself to accept death. Doing so would mean failing his master. With his body on the verge of collapse, he resolved to take a desperate gamble. He invoked a forbidden spell, Primordial God's Fate Reversal, an ancient technique used by Zoroastrian priests to cheat death by transferring their soul to another body. It was a dangerous and often fatal ritual, but with no other choice, he bet everything on his fortune. As golden energy erupted around him, he cast his final hope into the unknown, praying that his master would remain safe. When consciousness returned, he awoke in an unfamiliar body, surrounded by unfamiliar voices. Pain racked his new form, and the incessant scolding of a distant figure grated on his nerves. Then, realization struck. Had he succeeded? As he looks up, he sees a furious woman, dressed in elegant robes, stands over a young man collapsed on the floor. She calls out his name, Tang Woonhui, demanding that he stand up and respond. The young man, battered and bruised, remains silent, prompting her rage to intensify, as she berates him for his weakness and failure to respond properly. He recognizes that the woman before him is his stepmother, and she has no reservations about using violence against him. When she attempts to strike him, he suddenly reacts, catching her hand mid-swing. It's clear that he is not the same weakling she once controlled. Shocked by his defiance, she steps back, furious at his rejection of her authority. Left alone, Tang Woonhui takes a deep breath, finally enjoying a moment of quiet. He contemplates the memories of his past and the limitations of his current body. Despite its weakness, he discovers a hidden advantage, his lower dantian, a core energy center essential for martial arts. As his realization dawns, a spectral entity manifests behind him, symbolizing the immense power he can now cultivate. His resolve solidifies. He will train, grow stronger, and take revenge on those who wronged him. With determination burning in his eyes, he vows to show his enemies who they truly messed with. The next scene explains the situation of the clan Yan Woonhui, now Tang Woonhui is in. The Tang clan was no ordinary household. This was a bastion of power, one of the 6 great clans of the martial realm, reigning supreme over the Sichuan province. Beyond their fortified gates, the world was divided. Martial powers spread across the land, each force holding dominion over its region. But within Sichuan, none dared challenge the hegemony of the Tang clan. At the helm was Tang Hosan, a man who once stood at the heart of the Tang clan's strength, leading the legendary Wild Wind Squad. With them, he had forged an empire of his own, one that stood alongside the prestigious Nine Dragons division. But power in the Tang clan was never stable. It was fought for, seized, and defended with blood. Tang Hosan's lineage carried weight, and among his successors were 3 figures, each carved from a different mold. Tang Ziul, the firstborn, exuded an air of authority. Tang Yusheng, the second son, held a cunning edge, hiding behind a veil of unpredictability. And then there was the third son, the forsaken one, Tang Woonhui, a forgotten child, a discarded pawn, a name barely whispered in the halls of the great Tang estate. Yet now, as he stood in the shadows, something had changed. He was no longer just the insignificant third son. There was a fire in his eyes, something sharpened by suffering, something relentless. The night air was thick with tension as the young warrior clenched his robe, the weight of his predicament pressing against him. His internal energy was insufficient, his cultivation technique inadequate. But he would not allow these limitations to define him. The heavenly demon cult had existed for 1,000 years, and within its vast history, countless martial techniques had been perfected. He would seize that legacy, bending it to his will. Drawing upon the fragmented memories locked within him, he initiated a daring act of self-reconstruction. His upper dantian, still unrefined, trembled under the strain, yet he pressed forward. The air around him distorted as a virtual space materialized, a reconstruction of the heavenly demon archive, its endless shelves brimming with knowledge forbidden to most. The tome that called to him bore an ominous name: the Poison Dragon Essence Art, a technique devised by a master of the Tang clan, a figure who had abandoned conventional wisdom to merge the Tang clan's fearsome poison techniques with the demonic arts. The young warrior understood the risks. This was a path of no return, one that required the constant intake of poison to maintain his power. Yet, as he studied, he felt something awaken within. A presence, an instinct honed over countless battles. His Reaper Saint stage had begun to stir. A grin curled his lips. This was no mere coincidence. His past life had been drenched in blood and carnage, and now, that forgotten essence clawed its way back to the surface. But his revelation was cut short. Shadows loomed in the distance, figures that bore the unmistakable aura of vengeance. Martial uncles, brothers in arms, now sworn enemies. The weight of past grudges filled the air, thick with unspoken rage. One man in particular stood out, his fury palpable, his voice thunderous as he bellowed his name: Yan Woon Hui. Chains rattled as his uncle, once a powerful figure, now stood before him in indignation. Accusations flew like daggers: betrayal, disgrace, the shattering of sacred bonds. But the Woon Hui remained still, unimpressed by their fury. They had come expecting a cornered prey. They had found a predator. A flicker of violet energy danced across his fingertips, and in an instant, the battlefield was no longer theirs. Screams tore through the night as his supernatural power erupted, a force unlike any other. His uncle's fury turned to horror as realization dawned upon him. Ghost King, a vortex of violet and black chi surging around him. His expression remained cold, unreadable, as the elder before him trembled, his body buckling under the sheer weight of the power emanating from the younger warrior. Had he always been this strong? The realization clawed at the elder's pride, his gritted teeth betraying his growing desperation. The elder cursed under his breath. Damn it! Damn it all! But his Woon Hui had no interest in bartering words. He had other ways of extracting information. A single motion, a flick of his fingers. The elder's body twisted in agony as his very essence was seized, wrenched from him. His soul, a ghostly, writhing form, was torn free, dangling in the young man's grip like a helpless insect caught in a web. He screamed. The sound reverberated through the chamber, chilling those who heard it to their bones. The young man regarded the glowing wisp of spectral energy in his grasp. A twisted smirk touched his lips. This was a rare and potent source of power, one that could elevate an individual to uncharted heights. This is now my lunch. Without hesitation, he devoured it. Now then, the young man's voice was smooth, calculated, as he took a step forward. Will you talk obediently? His eyes gleamed, the remnants of the devoured essence still dancing in his gaze. Or will you be swallowed whole, just like him? The remaining enemies, bound by fear, had no choice but to answer. They spoke of the divine cult of the heavenly demon, a fanatical sect that revered their leader as a god incarnate. But beneath the facade, they were mere husks, puppets serving something far more insidious: the society. An organization without a name, yet one that inspired fear greater than the deity they claimed to worship. But as Woon Hui stared up at the monolithic structure, his expression remained unreadable. He had already glimpsed beyond the veil of power, beyond the husks of men who shed their humanity in pursuit of something greater. The Tower. They were no longer mortals. They were natural disasters, absolute beings standing above the skies. A challenge, a revelation, a shift in his plans. His gaze darkened. There was no time to wait. His poison attribute was growing, and the hands of fate moved ever closer. 2 months later, the Black Heaven's reign would begin. Rumors had already begun to slither through the estate that Tang Woonhoi's stepmom had already killed him and replaced him with a double. However, she was certain that something was keeping him alive. The clan head would be visiting soon. He couldn't afford for these whispers to reach his ears. How could someone change so monstrously in 2 months? As she ponders her second son, Tang Yuchang returns from his seclusion training. He greets her and talks about Woonhui. The rumors have even reached his ears. They plot to recommend him during the festival when the clan head visits in order to embarrass him. They smirk in joy, thinking that their plan will work out just fine. Yet beneath all the maneuvering, in a secluded chamber, another force is stirring. A figure sits cross-legged, immersed in deep meditation. Dark energy writhes around him, coiling like a living serpent. The air crackles with raw, unbridled power. A monstrous spectral beast looms behind him, its eyes glowing with a terrible hunger. Its form shifts between reality and the abyss, an ethereal force barely contained. Woonhoi's expression is calm, his focus unshaken. He is reaching for something beyond the limits of mortal strength. Later he asked the worker more about the outside world. The words hit him like a hammer to the chest. 6 years. The weight of lost time bore down on him as he stood atop the staircase, the dim candlelight casting jagged shadows over his tense frame. Below him, the messenger knelt, confirming the cruel truth. It had been 6 long years since he last walked these halls. 6 years since he was swallowed by the void of his own undoing. He had anticipated time displacement when using the paradoxical god's time reversal, but never had he fathomed this extent. Memories of his last moments before the shift, pain, chaos, and desperation, flashed before his eyes, but he crushed it beneath sheer resolve. His master's fate was still unknown. Was he dead? Alive? The uncertainty gnawed at him, yet, faint as it was, a glimmer of hope still remained. If there was even the slightest chance, he had to seize it. His eyes sharpened as he recalled the rumors. Tang Moon Hyuk, the Dark Sovereign. The mere mention of his name sent ripples through the underworld. The leader of the Sichuan Tang clan, one of the 10 Grand Masters under the Heavenly Alliance. To face him, he needed power. Not just raw strength, but absolute, undeniable dominance. He had already begun refining his technique, mastering the 12 fierce tiger steps, a martial art revered among vagabonds, turning one's entire body into a weapon. As he pondered his next move, a peculiar voice broke the tension. The small, furry creature beside him chirped, offering its insight. Despite its comical appearance, the being had proved to be an invaluable informant. His crimson gaze flickered, unreadable as he listened. News of Tang Yuchang surfaced, a name tied to the shifting tides. Pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, but gaps still remained. The storm in his heart had not calmed, it had only just begun. The dimly lit room was steeped in silence. His sharp eyes flickered with intrigue as he gazed down at the bowl placed before him. A dark liquid, thick and unassuming. The Grand Matron had forbidden him from eating anything, yet here it was, presented to him without explanation. His gaze lifted, piercing through the dim glow of the lanterns. A test? A deception? The young man's fingers curled around the bowl, lifting it to his lips. A familiar scent, laced with something foreign. He took a slow sip. It was then that he felt it. A surge of power erupted within him. Tendrils of energy flooding his meridians with an intensity that made his body tremble. His breath hitched, the sensation both exhilarating and alarming. Toxic cinnabar. His mind raced, piecing together the truth. This was no ordinary concoction. This was something designed to reshape him, to mold his very essence into something more, or something less. Memories of ancient texts flooded his thoughts. This was akin to the legendary Heavenly Demon's elixir, a substance that only the strongest could withstand. His lips curled into a smirk. Was this their grand attempt at binding him, breaking him, Outside, the sky stretched wide and unrelenting. He stepped forward onto the training grounds, the weight of expectation heavy upon him. His instructor, a battle-worn warrior named Tang Gon, stood before him, an unreadable expression on his face. A mere pawn in the matron's grand design. But he was not a pawn. He was the storm before the destruction, the shadow that would soon swallow them whole. "Teach me something useful," he murmured, his voice like tempered steel. Tang Gon's stance shifted, a stepping technique, one that let the user move like a phantom. The moment the warrior moved, the young man's keen eyes followed. His pulse quickened. This was the power he would wield. A ghost among men, untouchable. The courtyard was bathed in the glow of the midday sun, casting long shadows upon the polished stone tiles. The older man smirked, his expression one of easy confidence as he explained the technique. Shadow step, an art known only to the most skilled warriors. His words carried weight, but they were met with something unexpected. "I've mastered it," the words struck like a blade. The instructor's smirk faltered, his brows lifting in disbelief. Had the student truly grasped it in such a short time? His face twisted in amusement, then irritation. "Then prove it," he challenged, his voice dripping with skepticism. What followed defied expectation. In an instant, the young warrior's figure blurred, his movements impossibly fluid. His body flickered like a mirage, stepping through the air itself, vanishing and reappearing effortlessly, as though the ground beneath him was merely an illusion. The instructor's eyes widened, his mouth slightly agape. This wasn't mimicry. It wasn't an approximation. It was perfection. He clenched his teeth. His pride as an instructor, as a warrior, was being tested. "Then, a bet," he growled. Woonhui lips curled into a knowing smirk, his stance unwavering. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Only the certainty of victory. The instructor's face twisted in sheer disbelief, his breath hitching as his trembling fingers reached for his waist. His pouch, gone. A bead of sweat trailed down his temple as the realization struck like a hammer to the chest. The young warrior stood there, unreadable, unshaken. No smug grin, no boastful gloating. Just the calm, unyielding certainty of a predator who had already won. Tang Gon's expression wavered between disbelief and frustration. When had Woonhui learned shadow step? Woonhui, his hair a shadow against the light, remained an enigma, his lips curled into a faint smile, a mix of mockery and amusement. His relaxed stance contrasted the tension radiating from his opponent. Tang Gon's thoughts raced. There had been no secret training, no clandestine masters. The truth was clear. The boy had learned simply by observation, his talent beyond reason. Panic flickered in Tang Gon's eyes as he realized the boy wasn't just a prodigy, but a monster of understanding. Woonhui's words, veiled in jest, cut deep. Decades of training meant nothing in front of this child who dissected techniques with a glance. The gap between them was a chasm of wasted years. Woonhui's suggestion of another bet hung heavy in the air. Tang Gon hesitated, knowing it was a trap. But pride bound him tight. He had already lost so much, not just money, but his dignity. Woonhui's smirk widened. There was no escape. Woonhui moved, not as a man, but as a ghost, slipping through reality with mocking ease. Each step Tang Gon took, Woonhui mirrored effortlessly. Tang Gon's breath turned ragged, sweat pooling as he grasped at shadows. Tang Gon's technique shattered against him, a wave against stone. His composure frayed into desperation. His vision filled with spirals of movement, each more impossible than the last, until he faced the edge of his own failure. Woonhui loomed over him, a reminder that every gamble had been just a game. Tang Gon's strength ebbed away, his spirit hollowed by reality. He had been reduced to a lesson in Woonhui's ever-growing arsenal. The wind howled as Woonhui turned, his silhouette framed against the dying light. The real game had only just begun. Tang Woo Hyuk stood on the stone courtyard, his expression hard. The cold wind swept through the training grounds, its chill nothing against his ambition. Before him stood Tang Gon, a veteran warrior of the Wild Wind Squad. The tension between them was palpable. For 2 decades, the Wild Wind Squad had been nothing but a buried memory. A storm silenced by war. Tang Woo Hyuk was haunted by the images of shattered battlefields, a promise lingering in the winds. The wild wind would rise again. Now, in the shadow of history, he challenged the embodiment of that legacy. Tang Gon's initial response was cold, dismissive. His eyes measured Wu Hyuk, not just as a disciple but as a potential heir to a long-dead storm. His voice was skeptical, testing the young man's resolve. But Wu Hyuk's expression remained sharp. His desire to reclaim the legacy wasn't arrogance. It was a belief that change needed a herald. He didn't plead. He challenged, his confidence a promise. The Wild Wind Squad's defeat loomed large. For 20 years, hope of its revival had been nothing but an ember, smoldering within Wu Hyuk's heart. Now, he aimed to ignite it into a blaze. Tangon's stance shifted. His reluctance faded under Wu Hyuk's resolve. The air between them changed, a prelude to the storm they were about to unleash. He agreed to teach Wu Hyuk the Wild Wind Dance, a martial technique as fluid as it was deadly. But this was no ordinary apprenticeship. It was a trial where failure meant not just disgrace, but ruin. As the wind stirred, the courtyard became an arena where history would be rewritten. The Wild Wind Dance, thought lost to time, would once again cut through the air. And in that moment, Wu Hyuk's path was set, a path where the storm would rage once more. Tangon's technique unfolded, his body a gale made human. His skill was a storm that would not be denied. But the younger warrior remained calm. His thoughts surged beneath the still surface, calculating, discerning. When the moment came, the younger warrior responded with a grace that belied his inner turmoil. His movements were not just a reflection, but a new iteration of the wild wind, raw and unchained. A heartbeat later, the battle ended not with a clash, but with the clink of porcelain. The wager fulfilled, the scene shifted to a feast. Laughter and banter filled the hall, but beneath it lay a pulse of tension. The junior demon's fist clenched beneath the table. His thoughts churned, dark and swift. He had lingered too long, lost in the quiet of camaraderie. His true purpose flared in his chest, a brand of burning conviction. The junior heavenly demon had arrived, and the world would tremble at his step.